Welcome to Pop.0 with Bryan, Chaffin and John Kheit. Welcome to Pop.0 with Bryan, Chaffin and John Kheit.
We have a feedback loop going, John.
I found out the reason why. Sorry.
All right. Pro work there, huh?
We are to steal your and Jeff's catchphrase, top man.
Top man, that's right. Well, today is...
It's Wednesday.
Thursday, December 21st. I'm Bryan Chaffin. This is an episode of Pop.0, the podcast, or a video podcast even, for the Mac Observer. And yeah, that's our kind of awkward beginning. Who are you?
And I'm awkward John. And yeah, that was because I left the volume thingy on when you can't engage in the chat without having the live feed on, so you got to remember to mute it. So
yes,
the audience,
one does have to remember to mute it. Well, so the funny thing is, I also hadn't muted it, so I was not only hearing your loop, I was hearing my own loop on top of both of them.
So it was a symphony of symphony.
Yeah, but that was only in my ears because I do have it being piped through my headphones. Anyway, whatever. So sorry for the rough beginning, folks. Thanks for joining us. We very much appreciate it.
Well, we are a day late and $1 short, so all the more reasons to apologize. But I was a little under the weather, and Bryan was kind enough to give me some slack there.
Yeah, of course.
So
of course,
as always, have 4 topics. Although we don't always have 4 topics, but we're always lying.
We have 3, but we're lying. We
have 3, but we're lying.
And the 3, but we're lying.
And those 3 are Marzipan merged libraries, the one operating system to rule them all. 2, answer to what should be Apple's managerial structure, which is a question posed to you and Jeff
on ACM, the Apple Context Machine.
But I have an actual answer.
You have an answer. You have an answer that we discussed a lot of ideas, but you think you have the answer. The answer or an answer?
I have the answer.
The answer, because you are John fucking Kheit.
Once you hear this, first you will mock me, but then you will eventually succumb. Story of my life. Anyway.
Yeah.
So
that's number 2.
And yeah, and you guys, by the way, had a great conversation on it, so I don't mean to, it's not some backhanded way of saying, like, I thought you guys.
No, we didn't. We left it saying that we didn't actually have the answer. We only talked about some possibilities and potential ramifications of those possibilities and such. So if you have the answer, even an answer.
I have the answer.
I can't, I'm all ears. I mean, their ears stuffed with headphones right now.
Right.
But I am still all ears. So that's topic number 2.
Topic number 2. Topic number 3 is the 2018 Processor Palooza and why 2018 potentially could be the bestest year for Mac upgrades Everest.
The very bestest Everest?
Everest.
Oh my goodness gracious. That sounds fantastic. Okay. And since we're lying, what's topic 4?
Why does some stuff feel so good?
Oh, wait. I think we're about to engage a new demographic. Oh goodness gracious! I fear where this is going to go. You're scaring me, John. You were scaring me.
All right. So Jeff did a nice story on Marzipan, and why don't you give a little background to what Marzipan is and what this story
is? It's Project Marzipan, and it's the code name given within Apple for a project that would allow developers to write for iOS, but deploy to macOS at the same time, complete with support for keyboard and mouse. Okay.
So I don't know, what's your take and feeling about this? It was kind of, you were poo-pooing it on some level. As I don't know, I didn't get a sense of it was you didn't give a shit, but you were poo-pooing it on some level when you were talking with Jeff. So what's your sense over hearing the news now? You had a little time to digest it.
Well, we talked about this yesterday on ACM. I think Jeff talked about it too on TDO. I think it's great. Here I'll give you my very short version, John. One, Apple should have done this a long time ago. I've long wondered why we couldn't run iOS apps on our Macs, right? In a Windows, like similar even to the widget, the long neglected
the more modern version of the old Apple desk accessory. Yeah, I did an
yes, that thing. Thank you. Yes, that thing. And two, I worry about the potential dumbification of Mac apps. So it's one thing if iOS apps are going to be brought over to the Mac, because that's great, right? They're not all, by no means all. And I would even say there are a lot of iOS apps that would make crappy Mac apps, but some would just be fantastic to have running in the background or running, on the side or whatever. But I worry about full scale Mac apps getting even less attention than they do today.
I'm going to convince you that this is all awesome. In a minute. Very, I think, great insight. It gets to a bigger topic that you and I have kind of bemoaned in bits and spurts, which is just a general deprecation of software since the Apple stores have come into being. Like Apple's, not just Apple, but everybody else's software seemed to be richer and fuller and more attention to detail paid than after the App Store came out with the iPhone. All apps seem to have gotten thinner and shallower, and it seems like people are picking up Apple's bad habits of they write a piece of software, update it once or twice, and it becomes basically abandonware where attention isn't paid to it anymore, and you don't get these full apps. Like OmniGraffle is a flying piece of shit if you want to do like graphing flowchart stuff. It's so tedious, and the best thing I could say about it is it's way better than Visio, which is an even more admired raging pile of shit. But just there's no decent, easy to use, quick to pick up, good workflow flowchart software. Since MacDraw, every illustration program has adopted the shit UI of Adobe Illustrator, which is not usable by mere mortals.
I agree with that. Illustrator is voodoo to me. Like, I am not a mere mortal when it comes to technology, and voodoo and Illustrator and freehand before it have always been utterly voodoo to me.
Since Mac Paint, every Paint program UI has adopted the kind of mechanics of Photoshop, which have always been the shittiest UI mechanics known to man. Any idiot can pick up the lasso in Mac Paint, loop it, and move it, and the actual data will move. You try that in Photoshop or any knockoff app that everyone heralds as the new Photoshop. That simple maneuver doesn't work. The data you looped is not the data you manage. And so, again, no mere mortal can use that. And all these UIs have gone to shit. At least those programs that we mentioned have depth to them. They've been maintained. But it seems like just the ease of gaining software du jour has eliminated many much richer software packages that existed over time. And software is kind of getting weak. So I think it's very insightful that if you now get a 2-for-1 development, right, of develop an app for both the Mac and the iPhone, that some lowest common denominator app that results from that makes it the lesser of both for it to run on either, right? That's the fear. And I think it's a very legit fear, which would further depress software.
Right. But again, if it results in more of a net migration, an addition from iOS, that'll be great. And what I've also said, John, you might agree with us. You might vehemently disagree, or maybe we'll agree right past each other. I think that this offers the most opportunity for companies like the Omni Group, Smile Software, MacFun, Readle, those companies who are heavily vested in Apple's ecosystem, especially on the Mac side.
Yeah, it could. So there's a lot of potential on the negative and on
right. I mean, like, you know, people that won't compromise, who will actually use this to strengthen their offerings rather than just, you know, compromising and having some kind of quick fix. That's where we'll see the most from this.
Right. So, and I agree with you. I wrote an article years back on why couldn't we have iPhone and iPad apps on the Mac, like basically just full blown apps as they are. And you have that today in some sense. If you're the developer, you could launch your app in the iPhone emulator as part of the Xcode kit, and you could literally run your app on the Mac. And what I advanced is, look, it's the easiest way for Apple to have convergence of touch interface and a regular Mac. You just make the Mac touch screen. And then if you launch an iPhone app, it's a full touch UI on it, right? And you could use it exactly the way you would on the iPhone because its widgets are there. And all you need is for the screen to tilt back, kind of like the Surface Studio, to have a mode like that where either the MacBook flips so the screen is flat and you could use those widgets more naturally that way, or just the screen tilts back enough and you kind of use it more naturally. And it's a great start, was my argument, to morphing in that way. But this is different. So the way everyone is interpreting this in the press is you write once and you deploy everywhere. And I think that part is accurate. I think Jeff and you got that exactly right. And Jeff, I think, got it right first on one of his TDO talks, which, by the way, he does a phenomenal job on TDO. He's hurting so many cats on that show. I don't know how he friggin' does it. It's very, he deserves more credit because I don't know who else is doing a daily show that has that much depth and that many moving parts.
I will tell you that another person you should maybe pay more attention to then is Chuck Joyner. Jeff does, in fact, a great job, especially you know, managing this particular herd of cats. But Chuck Joyner does a great job of moderating large panels.
Yeah,
you know, 3, 4, 5, 6 people.
I've seen him do it. I think he does a good job. But just the consistency of Jeff's performance day in on TDO is, I don't know, for me, is very impressive. I think he does.
Yeah, likewise.
So, but I digress. Right. So most people, I think he got it right, which is this is really attractive for developers because they could write once, deploy many, right? And hopefully a lot of the, hey, I'm running on an iPhone. Hey, I'm running on a Mac. So I'll use one set of graphical widgets on the screen versus the other, right? I'm going to use a touch pop-up menu on the iPad versus a menu bar set of menus on the iPhone or something like that. And how it does that magic remains to be seen. I'm pretty sure you're going to have to do some alterations for the UI to some degree manually, but my guess is it will also automate a lot of this for the developer, which will be great. Okay, so I think that's right, but I think there's a more profound result of this that kind of combines with the desk accessory article that I wrote a few years back, which is this can result in the one operating system to rule them all. Apple can have one operating system that runs everywhere, but it will run differently depending upon what peripherals are accessible. So right now, Apple has 6 user interfaces, right? They have the Apple Watch, which is their smallest, most limited device. They have, I'll just say, Apple TV, which is its own kind of iOS device. Then they have the Apple iPhone, the iPhone Plus, which has like an extra landscape mode that kind of makes it in between what is the next device, which is the iPad user interface. And 6th, they have the Mac, right? So I don't think what I'm talking about could possibly run on the watch, but maybe at some point it could.
Okay, I was muted the whole time. I'm sorry. I was counting with you. You've skipped 5.
Oh, hold on. So Apple Watch, Apple TV,
Yeah.
iPhone,
Yeah.
iPhone Plus,
Yeah.
iPad,
Mac. All right.
the 6 different UIs that they have currently.
Okay.
or at least 6 different presentations of UIs depending upon the app. So I don't know that this will work on the watch at least yet. The watch probably has to get a little more powerful, but think about this. So if you have a library that lets you write once and deploy for the iPhone Plus, and the Mac, what the differences left in the operating system are small. It's still running the same Mach-ish kernel. And the big difference is you kind of don't have the Finder on iOS, right? So you could basically add these libraries to Mac OS or iOS, add the Finder in. It's not quite this simple, but you would have one operating system. And what the operating system would do is it would say, right now, the way that this is put out is the app would run and the app would say, what operating system am I on? And it would launch on that same binary would launch on an iPad and look like an iPad, and it would launch on a Mac and look like a Mac. You could have that at the operating system level, meaning your phone, when it's launching an app and it's only got its normal screen and touch interface, it'll launch the iPhone app. But if your phone is connected to a screen and a keyboard and a mouse, it would say, oh, I'm going to allow the Finder to be visible, and this is now going to work in Mac mode. And when I launch this app, it's going to launch an app in Mac mode. So now you have a convertible device that presents itself differently simply based on the peripherals that are available. And you have more than enough CPU grunt in an iPhone. We've seen it's faster than many MacBook Pros at this point to run the full OS. And now you have the ability to get around cleverly for Tim Cook to get around what he said about toaster fridge, because this is a toaster or a fridge depending upon what you want it to be at the time. You want the full force of like Mac OS because you're doing something detailed. You just connect your Bluetooth keyboard and mouse to it, and assuming you have a big enough screen connected, all of a sudden you have your full-on Mac. And if you're just walking around with the device by itself, it's working like an iPhone.
All right, so I've got a number of concerns about this. One is the first is you are now requiring libraries for Mac to be loaded up on iPhone and iPad, and you're requiring libraries for iPhone to be loaded up on iPad and Mac, and you're requiring libraries for iPad to be loaded up on Mac and iPhone. And that's a lot of extra baggage that everyone's carrying around all the time that is not going to be needed on that individual device. Secondly, I start thinking about what a shit show Windows, what was the first version of Windows that was supposed to be?
8.
It was 8 that was for tablets and desktops, right? And that was that was, in my opinion, a complete shit show, and it like didn't allow. It brought everything down to the lowest common denominator and didn't allow for each device to be what it should be and what it could be. And I would hate to go down that path. So, and how do you, I mean, so how does what you're saying?
So the second question shows I didn't present this well enough for you to understand how that can't exist with this, right? So what happens with Windows 8 and 10 is they kind of have a morphed UI that you're basically using regular Windows, and you touch the window bar and move the window, right, when it's in tablet mode. And you could even switch it to a tablet mode, but all that really does is it kind of increases the widget size, like the closed windows gets bigger kind of thing, right? So it's still one UI that operates in either mode. This would let the UI change, meaning if you take what is a screen and detach it from the MacBook body, right? That UI instantly every app, the menu bar goes away. There is no menu bar on the iPad, right? The windows for the windows, there's no windows. The windows go away. So the apps instantly start running in iPad mode. You still have a dock, I guess that's in common. But now the app that you had for mail doesn't look like it does on it. There's no menu bar. There's no whatever. It looks like the mail client does.
Yeah, God, isn't what you're describing, John? Isn't that just like almost a guaranteed funnel to having these lowest common denominator simple mobile apps being foisted off as desktop caliber apps?
Well, that's a separate question, and it was a very good question you asked on ACM, and let's get to that. But I want to get to the previous two questions, right? So meaning when you detach the screen from a laptop and it's just basically a tablet at that point, the UI completely turns to just the current iPad UI. You get that? I mean, does that make sense?
Yeah, I just don't know if that's necessarily in and of itself a good thing.
Well, it gives you two devices in one, right? It means when you carry your, if you want to, all of a sudden you're working on your Mac and like, oh, I don't want to work in this tedious way. I want to sit back on the couch and use an iPad. You don't need a separate device. You yank the screen off, and now that's working fully with all your data in place. You don't have to go looking for data, right?
Excuse me, hold on. I just want to make sure that I understood what you said correctly. I'm supposed to yank the screen off. Is that what I'm supposed to do? Supposed to yank that screen off?
Yank the screen off.
I'm supposed to jerk it right off? That's what you're telling me?
You should jerk it off. Jerk that stuff. Just jerk it. Both hands.
Should I jerk it with both hands, or so are you talking about it like is this like what?
You gotta synchronize the jerk to be effective.
Okay.
I am jerk, dude. You gotta. I'm
12 years old. So.
But don't overgrip.
Just
you don't want to hurt the screen, you gotta yank that sucker.
Rick, by the way, has a couple points. He says he noted that the large iPad has its own size class that you can have split screen, which is
right.
It's
it's a separate UI presentation than say the iPhone, right? It's different.
Yeah, but iPad itself has two.
True. So you're right. Maybe that's a 7th UI, right? Depending upon the size, how it decides what widgets are used.
Okay. He also notes that that macOS would have to go to ARM to do this.
No, it would not. That is incorrect.
Okay, you can explain that. And then he lastly noted that you're essentially describing a surface.
No, I think he's having the same difficulty that you are because I'm not describing it right. So meaning, look, if you understand, let's start with more simply. Why it doesn't have to go to ARM is because today on an Intel processor, you can run your through Xcode right on your screen an iPhone app, right? That is made for an ARM. And that's not done through emulation. It's done basically because the libraries are there when you have Xcode, right? To basically run it at probably faster than the native speeds. Well, if you have a powerful enough computer. So just that the libraries are there, it will run natively. It could, but it does allow you to have an ARM-based processor for all this stuff. And compiling stuff in fat binaries is beyond trivial in Xcode, and it has been since the next step days. But let's start more simply. You do get that you generate an app using this Marzipan set of libraries, right? Once, right?
Okay.
And it's literally one binary bundle, one package, right? So you can download literally the same binary onto your Mac or to your iPad.
Yeah, but doesn't that make it a lot bigger?
Not really.
Oh, come on, man.
No.
The dual what was the old PowerPC and
Fat binaries, yeah.
Those were always a lot bigger.
Not really.
What are you talking about? They were a lot bigger. They were known to be bigger. That was bigger was the thing.
They were bigger, but relative to what? These programs, the actual binary executable part of the program is usually not nearly as big as all the graphics resources and other crud in there, which is probably mostly common. And a lot of this is going to be pulling out of the libraries.
Well, then why were fat binaries so much bigger than not fat binaries?
Because
back in the day,
they were usually like, if the program was say 200 megabytes thin, that with the fat binary was maybe 130 megabytes fat. So that's not that big a deal. And now that programs are on the order of gigabytes, I think the differences are even less, potentially, at least as far as the compiled part of this. But this isn't compiling multiple binaries, right? This, because you're going to have both sets. It's compiling for both sets of libraries. So the libraries, what you said before, that the system needs both sets of libraries to execute is correct, right? But it's not compiling like an ARM processor version. It might, but it doesn't need to. Like if you had an ARM-based Mac, this would compile just fine. But we're getting off from it. But let's just say worst case scenario, okay, it's double the size. I don't think that's the case, but let's just say it's double the size. But you have one executable. You could launch that executable on an iPad, right? And you're just going to see the iPad GUI. You're not going to see any extra shit.
Yeah,
right?
no, I get that. Yeah, I got that part.
And you launch that same app on the Mac, and you're going to see the Mac GUI. And I guess a great example, in my opinion, is either Notes or Mail, right? Let's go with Mail because I think most people know what the Mail app looks like, and it's going to be a bit starkly different because there's a lot of menu bars and there's a lot of windowing and slap, and there's none of that on the iPad, right?
Okay.
But the core of the app is pretty similar on both. So that will launch in a different mode based on where it's at. So now, when you that's not the case in to what Rick was saying, that you essentially have a Surface. In Surface, you don't get a different UI for Mail, right? When you detach the keyboard, Mail is still Mail on the Surface tablet or the Surface Book. It's still the same. You could put it in tablet mode, but the tablet mode essentially just makes widgets bigger, and you could put it in tablet mode while it's working like a laptop, or vice versa. You could leave it in desktop mode while you're using it as a tablet with a detached screen. But all tablet mode on Surface does is makes a few widgets bigger, right? It doesn't fundamentally change the UI. What we're talking about is it's a different UI for the app outright, whether it's launching on one thing or the other. Are you with me?
Yes.
So you could have that. Now imagine every app and the operating system takes advantage of these libraries. So now when the operating system is engaged, it wakes up or is booted or whatever, it says, crap, I'm booting and I've got a keyboard and a large screen attached and a mouse. So I can boot with the full UI being, for all my apps, being Mac, including a Finder. The Files app becomes the Finder app, right? So it's going to be in full Finder mode. And if I detach the screen, it says, crap, I lost all that extra stuff. The best UI I could now use is UI number 4, which is the iPad UI. So I'm going to relaunch or change the mode of those so that now instead of the Mail app having menu bars and multiple windows, it's just Mail for iPad. Right? So okay. It's very different from Surface. Surface maintains the same UI even when you detach the screen. It still has that the widgets, the closey boxes and stuff like that. It doesn't fundamentally change its UI. This would let it fundamentally change its UI. And that means you could have one device. You could have your iPhone with a little dock when you dock it in, and it senses keyboard and whatever, and it works like a full Mac.
All right, well, let me get to another thing. iOS is smaller because it has less functionality than macOS. So how do you solve for that other than making macOS dumb?
So the size difference, I don't think when you actually add it up is that much different. Yeah, Rick.
It runs a lot lighter. We know that it runs lighter and leaner.
So just one comment. So Rick is saying it has a tablet mode. It goes full screen. You answered your own question, Rick. You can go full screen even when it's not in tablet mode, right? You could blow up any app and it goes into that full screen mode. So it's not quite the same thing as running in full iPad mode, right? Where the iPad just does away with multiple windows and all that stuff. You can still pop a new window up over the full screen or go behind it, just like when it's in full screen mode. So I'd argue that the Surface doesn't quite get there. The Surface is kind of like, when you whatchamacallit, it's kind of like the Trio versus the iPhone. It had some of the components there, but the differences in implementation matter versus when you're in a full kind of iPad mode. So when I'm in full screen, so for instance, Rick, when you're in full screen mode, you still got the start bar, right? You still got the little dock window that's accessible just like normal. So it's different, in my opinion.
How much time do you spend on? You have a Surface, right?
Yeah, I have a Surface.
And how much time do you spend on it?
Not too much, but I use it here and there, and I do use it in tablet mode versus the other mode, and I find tablet mode is just annoying.
Enough that you're though speaking from personal experience as opposed to my speaking on this, which is simply based on reading and looking. The most popular use for my Surface is? I use it as a stand for my MacBook during this podcast. That fucking delights me, man. That delights me.
That's its #1 use.
That delights me. Sorry, microphone noise.
And not just as a stand for my MacBook. So I'm sorry. You had one other question I want to get to, which is I think it's the same question, which is it's much larger, right? And that's not really true. If you do a clean install of Mac OS onto a blank drive, you'll find that it's using, I don't know, say 2 gigabytes or so. It's not that much storage, 2 to 4 gigabytes, depending upon what you have installed. And it's the same when you get a fresh iPhone. It's using like 2 or 3 gigabytes as well for the install that are just, part of the system. And you're not getting the full, whatever, 64 or 128 gigs of storage of your phone, right? Because of the operating system build. So the size difference isn't that much. I would argue maybe you lose a gig by having combined libraries. And it's not clear, by the way, will they have separate libraries or will they actually merge the libraries? Because some of these libraries have been common forever. The text box object in AppKit is the same text box object in iOS's AppKit.
Sure.
And most of AppKit is identical, most of it. So when you get Xcode, a lot of these libraries are kind of just built on top of one another. So it might not even be 2 separate sets of libraries. It just might be one combined mega set of libraries, which makes programming even easier, especially if Apple can automatically handle UI detection that, hey, I'm an iPad, so I'm only going to run in iPad mode with no Mac OS-y type vestiges. So maybe we're going to pay a gig's worth of space on this. I don't think it's that big a deal. And libraries, in theory, at least, if they're done well, should not tax the CPU anymore. Meaning, if you don't need libraries, the app is not calling the libraries. Well, it's just not loading those bits. They're just inert on the drive. It likely will use a little bit more RAM, but I don't think significantly more. And on modern iPhones, I don't think it makes a difference. Modern iPhones have 6 cores, which is more than which is more than any MacBook, by the way. And 3 gigs of RAM.
But they're different cores.
They're different cores, but I'd argue at least they've got 2 very powerful cores that are every bit as good as on a MacBook Pro, which a lot of the utilities have borne out.
We have an echo.
They have borne out.
Maybe it's gone. All right. Well, so then to a certain extent, what you're talking about is actually abstracting the GUI from the operating system.
Correct. The GUI will do what I always kind of was my dream, which is it will detect what output devices and input devices it has, and then say, okay, based on this suite of screens and mouses, or
Yeah. All right. So based on that wording, abstracting the GUI from the operating system, I'm a believer, and this is something Apple can certainly do. It does seem like they would want to have a unified processor for all the devices, which is Apple's been rumored to be working on for a long time anyway.
Right. Their CPU development team has outpaced the industry by an incredible margin. The processor in the iPhone 10 is the shit. I mean, true, the 6 cores are not equally 6 cores. A couple of them are low idle ones. A couple of them are, but nonetheless, that's incredible what they've done. And there's no reason that if you unleash that team, they can't make it more and more and more. And there's frankly no reason why this current iPhone obliterates the MacBook 12-inch. Kills it. So you could imagine just having
some things
for many things.
There's a lot of things that x86 does better than or differently than ARM, and right. So it's not an apples to oranges comparison.
Yeah, that's true. It's true. But generally speaking, it just got more. It's got more grunt overall. Is my opinion on that, and not just on the benchmarks, which it clearly does on the benchmarks, but it just has. The multi-core aspects, even though they're not equally multi-cores, is still huge in what you could do. Could you imagine if you don't care about running that CPU full bore because you've got a good power source to it, up to a screen and stuff? Now, the video card part of it, yeah, the video processing on the phone might not be as good as, but it's still, it's going to be really good thing. And that's where this eGPU stuff comes in, right?
Right.
If you have a dock where you plug in your iPhone and you have an eGPU plugged into it, all graphics processing on that, or you even build it into, for all I care, into the display, all of a sudden your iPhone becomes your computer, becomes your world, becomes your iPad, becomes whatever, depending upon what peripherals are available. And it starts to become a very powerful idea. And it starts to do what I said is, I don't know what the recipe was going to be, is what I said, but this is a really interesting recipe for a convergence device. It maximizes the best UI possible for the equipment available, but keeps the core common.
Yeah, abstracting the GUI from the operating system, I really do. I am now a fan.
So,
I'm now a fan. I do still worry though. I do still worry about the potential dumbification of Mac apps, and that goes with however this is implemented. It is a concern, and that concern will not be alleviated until and if we see this happen, and then that doesn't happen.
So, you know what you could think of this is, remember when I guess this is four years back or so, that Apple slowly started to implement screen resolution independent into the operating system. So if you have a MacBook Air which has a crappy resolution, a non-retina screen, it intelligently says, I'm going to resize the GUI to work for this display. And if you have a retina level display, it properly rasterizes and generates a UI that works with that set of hardware. So again, this device independent UI is what this is, right? Because once you get a new device in there, the UI will conform to to maximize its potential versus a different set of devices, like a small screen versus big screen, a touch screen versus a non-touch. Sure. So I think this is a way that not only is it an interesting new recipe, it's a way for Tim Cook to be right. This can be a toaster.
Okay. But I don't actually think, I think that Tim Cook is man enough to just acknowledge when he's wrong. I don't think they need that excuse. I understand what you're saying.
I wonder why you say that when I have yet to see evidence of him apologize.
Okay, I can't argue against that. Nonetheless, I don't think that they're going to come up with some sort of ass backwards way to do this just so that Tim doesn't look like he's wrong.
So Rick also mentions it's not just the OS, that the Mac apps have much larger file assets. Well, sure, there's no doubt about that, because they're much deeper apps, right, Rick? Meaning like Photoshop, the full-on version, is a heavy, deep app. And if you're going to launch a full-on version of that on an iPad, it's going to clobber stuff. The size of the deployment, again, if you look, Rick, just if you do a fresh install off of Mac OS and do a fresh install on the iPhone, you're talking maybe a gigabyte a difference, but that includes the apps, right? The native apps that are on there. Now you're going to have more native apps because maybe you get a phone app on the Mac now, which you never had, and I don't understand why I don't have a phone app on my Mac. And you get an Apple Store app on the Mac for the first time ever all of a sudden, right? When I don't know why.
Oh my God, you know what we could have? We could have an App Store app.
Yeah.
What a crazy kooky concept.
Yeah, we could have a calculator.
Oh my God, are you kidding me?
We could have a stock widget on the iPad. Crazy, I know.
All right, we have a dead horse in front of us.
Okay, so anyway, that was my new concept. I agree that there's a lot of detail to be filled in the blanks, but I think I haven't seen this concept bandied about, and I think it's a very powerful one. This becomes the one operating system to rule them all as potential. Potentially. Yep. So okay, we killed that topic.
Wait, one more question. Do you think Apple could actually do it? You've been pretty down on Apple's ability to execute for a while.
So, well, this is a great segue on what Apple's structure should be, which is our topic number 2. Could it do it? Right? So let's do that segue. Topic 2 is, what should Apple structure to be? Why don't you recap Rick's question to you and kind of what your thoughts were with Jeff, and I'll give you the answer.
All right. So Rick was sort of, I can't remember if he was reacting to something we were talking about from the standpoint of it's all about Apple's ability to scale or failure to scale. The fact that Apple's been hiring these new television execs left and right, and then the perceived shortcomings in areas such as no new Macs and iPhones and iPads languishing to a certain extent, and so Rick asked us in the Apple Context Machine Facebook group what we thought, how we thought that Apple should be structured. So what Jeff and I talked about was just some different ways that Apple could be structured, including what we're seeing with the television world, where Tim Cook has hired Jamie Ehrlich and Zach Van Amberg from Sony Pictures, given them this massive multi-billion-dollar budget, and seemingly empowered them to do what they need to do to execute a competent and competitive content the business model. And I mean, they've signed 3 high-powered shows, including one with Steven Spielberg, one with Jennifer Aniston and Reese Witherspoon, and then the newest one, which is sort of what got this conversation going, which is with Ronald D. Moore, whom you might remember from a little show called Star Trek: The Next Generation, as well as the Battlestar Galactica reboot. I love that guy. It's going to be a sci-fi show that Apple assigned. That's the 3rd one. And so, it seems like Jamie and Zach have everything they need to do what they need to do, and they've been empowered and they have the decision-making ability, and they're making this stuff happen because they're hiring people left and right. They're signing shows. Everything is seems like it's rip-roaring good. And so Jeff and I sort of talked about how that might or might not apply to the rest of Apple, and the fact that one of the differences you have between the content business and Apple's hardware business is that a big part of Apple's strength as a hardware maker is that all of the devices play together, work together, talk together. They all work with the software. They increasingly work with the processors and the GPUs, and everything is they have a whole widget model that is tied part and parcel to everybody being small and tight and working together, and everything's kind of interrelated and everything like that. But the downside is that when apparently the wrong people get distracted, things don't get iterated. So, and that's where we left the question. We don't actually have an answer as to what the rest of the structure might look like. But you say you do.
I do, but I'm going to give you a little more credit because you had the most cogent explanation for why Apple Apple's failure to have a good management structure and scale. And by the way, don't think I didn't notice that both Jeff and you admitted begrudgingly and in limited circumstances that some of the failure had to be laid at Tim Cook's feet. And for that, I say, ta-da.
Well, Yeah, who?
I told you so.
I never argued with you on that. What are you talking about?
Okay. All right. Whatever. I'll take my wins. So, but
take your wins wherever you can make them.
That's right. But you laid it out really nicely. You said, look, they're torn. They're torn because Steve Jobs, one of the teachings he has is you want to run Apple like a startup company. But at a certain point, that becomes difficult, especially when Steve Jobs isn't around. And
when you have so much responsibility to execute so much money.
Right. That if you only focus on the startup portions, you seemingly, as a consequence, end up call it not paying attention to many parts and allowing them to languish. That's the inherent problem. If you run it like a small company, lots of parts of the big company languish because the people that are running it like a small company don't have the time or energy to pay attention to the parts that end up languishing. So how do you solve that? How do you scale that? What would a good manager, unlike Tim Cook, have done to fix this? A manager like, say, Steve Jobs. The one place I disagreed with you when you were talking about this, you were saying, well, Apple was a different company back then. It was only $40 billion. And when it gets to be like a, whatever, $200 billion company in revenue or whatever it is, the things change. And I argue that when Steve Jobs was there in 2010, he was doing more with less, was putting out and updating all those devices and updating the software. And that year he launched the iPad and updated all the iPods and updated iWorks, and everything was being updated regularly while he was there. So in
okay, but hold on, those last couple of years, what? No, I'm going to pick at that. I'm going to pick at that. Stop. Listen, let me make this point. Let me make this point. Those last couple of years when you said he was still doing all those things, he was actually focusing on Apple University and the development of Apple Park. So like the same people that have failed to iterate so very well since then were the same people who were actually doing all those things while Steve was still around.
True. Well, true. It's a different cast of characters, no doubt. But that my point is that it's clearly possible to do things on a wide breadth and iterate them all well. Now, true, they're shipping more products now than they did in 2010, and by significant amounts. I would argue that the extra shipment is not the reason for the distraction, but it's more that Steve isn't there. So, and this is part of the solution where I do have a solution to this product. But I'll lay a couple more pieces down. I just bought a copy of FileMaker Pro, and it's shocking how little it's been updated since 1992, despite it becoming a relational database versus not. But just because I wanted to fuck around with it, and it's a fun toy, and I used to use it a million years ago, and whatever. But what was interesting about it is right on the splash screen for FileMaker and on the Get Info box, it says, an Apple subsidiary. And this ties in a little bit to what you talked about, like, hey, these guys seem to be empowered under the TV group to do their own shit, right? And they're doing their own shit, hopefully independently of Apple, which will let them scale this up without this problem of the startup team being the bottleneck for everything, right? Clearly, FileMaker is not being paid attention to by Apple, right?
Okay.
They're doing their own thing, and they're developing it at their own glacial pace, but at least it's being iterated and updated. So this is the difference in how you get things going. Everything should be kind of like the equivalent of a FileMaker subsidiary. In some sense, the Apple group, the TV group, is a subsidiary, right? And it's just that through pain, Tim Cook realizes he don't know shit about TV, right? Clearly, his input has only caused 2 catastrophes with regard to what they wanted to do for independent development. And he's realized that, to his credit, and now is letting someone competent run that. And probably he's not going to be involved in that in any way, at least for programming, one could hope. So it will run more independently. But it's still a fundamental problem. What do you want? The other thing that you said was so goddamn good, man. I got to give you credit. You said that, look, the fact that they run this as a startup has totally not just saved Apple, it's made Apple thrive, right? That this group of idiots keeps going on to the next thing. Yeah, the cost has been they abandon and forget and let languish old stuff, but the prize has been the fucking iPhone, the iPad, new stuff, right? It's if you had to say, well, it's a necessary evil, you'd be okay with living with that because it's produced more good than bad. The languishing isn't good, but the new stuff has been great. So how do you solve that problem? And the other brilliant insight you had was also that Steve Jobs let shit languish all the time. He made like iWorks and then he didn't give a fuck about it too at some point. There was a lot of projects that Steve started and he just, like the ADD toddler, went on to the new topic and he didn't give a shit about it. And it languished. So knowing that this languishing happens, what you do is you have a team kind of like the FileMaker group, a subsidiary that is left to their own devices to keep it iterating and updated and modern. And if the ADD toddlers, i.e. the management, don't pay attention to it, it's fine. There's a group there to keep running it. And when I don't know what you want to call them, the think tank, the ADD toddler group, when they get a new idea of what they want to pursue, the infrastructure should be that when they zoom in, that everyone in the subsidiary group lets them take over to do what the new project is that they want to do. So meaning if they ignore the Mac group keeps iterating to its own devices. If they come back and decide, fuck, we need to put Face ID on the Mac or some new crazy thing, or to have a unified set of libraries where the Mac can run like an iPad or whatever, the infrastructure of that subsidiary is such that they understand whenever the think tank comes in to change things radically, they make way. So that way, the startup, what you do is you say the group that is the startup group that acts like a startup can stay small and they have the power to do anything they want, including let languish stuff. But the subsidiary left behind there iterates on the product that is languished from the.
But if you have subsidiaries that are in charge of any of the current product lines that we think, the ones that most of like us and most of our listeners and watchers are going to care about, which is iPad, iPhone, and Mac. If you have subsidiaries of any of those companies, how do they keep working together, right? Because like right now, it's largely the same team that does iOS and Mac OS, something that does get iterated year after year. And if you start separating those things, and if you separate the hardware from the software, now you don't have those two teams talking as well together either. Like there is danger in that.
I'm not sure how much danger there is, because if you have the Mac group, whether and Rick is saying what you're talking about is divisions, and like, yeah, maybe it's division, but the point is whoever is at the top of hardware, if he's getting no feedback on what to do about next year, he gets to make the decision. I'm gonna iterate this and use the new processors. I'm gonna use the latest video card. I'm gonna use the new. Why the fuck is storage still stuck at 3 terabytes for the iMac? Are you fucking kidding me? Like, you clearly have to have a person that you trust to allow the technology to iterate in its natural course, just like FileMaker does. But what FileMaker hasn't had to deal with is Apple zooming in and saying, we're radically going to change the architecture, right? All of a sudden, for whatever the fuck reason, Apple decided to give a fuck about Final Cut Pro, right? That they didn't like the old infrastructure and they're going to redesign it from scratch. Now, whether that's a good idea or not, we can, disagree about. I think they did a shit job, but for whatever reason, the ADD toddler decided today I want to deal with FileMaker, with Final Cut and re-architecture it. The guys that are running that subgroup had no power to say no. We don't. It's like,
well, and
Rick, tell us what to do.
Rick points out that the star developers and star engineers move around a lot, and star designers too.
Well, this is where you have to build the infrastructure, right? Like, they didn't leave the star developers with the FileMaker group, right? But they left enough people to do whatever the fuck it's doing, right? So what you do is you build your star team, which is your ADD toddler startup thingy, and you have that be what it is, and then you backfill whatever is needed for continued iterative development, a B team of sorts, in all these other areas to do their shit, to fix bugs, for fuck's sake. I mean, iTunes alone, there's literally a dude with a red fuck. Well, he's not literally with a red stapler, but with, you know, there's red stapler man that's looking over iTunes. There's one guy. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. That's not right. Just because the toddler went away. So there should be enough people there to keep maintaining that.
Yep.
But this startup group is a small group. They can whoosh in and totally upturn whatever subdivision they want, because they've got a new direction, and they could bring their star players to set it all up. That helps educate the B players that are going to be left there to iterate that in the future, right? They get to learn as they co-develop with that. And then when that group whisks away, it stays. So the idea is to have, like, I guess Rick is saying the division, but to have the same type of backfill talent that FileMaker has, and to let this startup group entity, just call it the new projects division, or new.
All right. So listen, I'm hearing everything you're saying, and I get where you're saying. And there's even a part of me that says that would be a good idea. There is inherent danger in allowing any kind of drift in these core products in the teams. And it's a tricky ass balance. And I'm glad I'm not the person who's having to make the decision. It's a tricky ass balance for Tim to walk, but we do seem to need to do something differently.
I'll tell you why I disagree with that, because if someone starts iterating in a direction that they don't like, the company is there. They could see, right? It's like, what the fuck do you mean you're going to release this video card? I don't like that because of whatever reason. They can still, the startup group has the power to bitch slap and give new direction to anyone, anytime, right? That's the point. If they're not paying attention and everything is going fine, that means it's been going fine. It's being iterated. If something starts to go in a direction they don't like the guy that's running it decides, like, I'm getting rid of, I don't know what, there's nothing left to get. I'm getting rid of the delete key, right? I would think that the people internally have the option to hear this first before they actually release the product, right? So there's plenty of opportunities to have a check and balance on this, that something doesn't go crazy. But generally,
acknowledge my point. That kind of change does have inherent risk too.
It does.
Okay, that's it. That's all I'm saying, because like I said, I'm more or less in empathy with what you're saying here. And I would add that something does need to change, seemingly, but I just want us to acknowledge that this isn't some sort of cornucopia of nothing but goodness. That there is inherent risk with that kind of change.
Right. And Rick is pointing out that Steve Jobs hated the B team, but let me assure you that Steve was surrounded by less than B players at many times, which is why there were so many goddamn firings in the elevator and whatnot. So he could hate them all he wants, but reality says that exists, and you might as well use that team to actually do something positive, which is to iterate this shit. What I would argue is the downsides are very apparent. You go for 4 years with no updates to certain products, which is
right.
Ridiculous.
Actually, going a year without an update is ridiculous.
And let me tell you, these supposed A players have just created the two greatest security fuck-ups in the history of security fuck-ups. I mean, in two fucking whatever, in the span of a month, they have ass raped the worst security gotchas that Microsoft may have ever made in aggregate, and surpassed them. So this A team is doing a fucking bang up job, let me tell you. So this is one of those theoretical bullshit stories that Steve Jobs like to tell, but the reality is he lived with a very different reality, and you have to pay attention to it.
Well, okay, all right. Now I've got an observation to tweak that, because Steve hated the B team. He was constantly on alert for getting rid of the B team. That was the thing. Steve never saw it as now I've gotten rid of the B team, I'm good. Steve, this is based only on extensive reading and listening to what people have to say who were actually working with him in the last 15 years. And he was simply constantly on alert and always believed that it was up to him and the rest of the top management to weed out B team players who crept into the organization.
So again, I think that's one of those theoretical stories that he knew damn well wasn't true. Just like when he knew, he said the iPod would never have video. He knew it was fucking not true, even the day he was saying it. It's one of these things. It's true. What I give him credit for is I'll flip it on its head. He was always on the lookout for A players, and he was willing to pay any fucking price to get the A players, and he wanted them near him to do the great things in the startup group, right? He wanted those players, those big thoughts, and he was always on the lookout for pulling those guys out of B teams. He would save them from the B teams, right? When he pulled the fellas from the Apple II group to swindle them off to the Mac group, he's like, fuck all those other B players, let them go keep doing the Apple II, right? He actually, so listen to his deeds, not his fucking words, because we know his words are very unreliable. But when he pulled those guys from the Lisa team and the Apple II team, he was perfectly happy to let Apple II team keep making him money, right? He didn't say, you know what, I hate all you B fucks, you're all fired. Nah.
No, he didn't fire me, just belittled them and insulted them.
Well, that's not good, but the point is we could, Tim Cook has improved in that regard, but the point is, listen to his deeds. He kept them on, and he kept the money.
Get the money. He did keep the money, yeah.
So, like I said, you can't get too tied up in a lot of his bullshit rhetoric. He used that to good effect for marketing for the company on numerous levels, and it's great to have good ideals. And it also doesn't mean when some B team is running something like, oh, I don't know, MobileMe and iCloud, that they fuck up. It doesn't mean that you don't go and correct that, and hopefully you improve even that iterative team to be A-level players. But the reality is that's not humanity is not developed of all A players, right? So you have to pick and choose and put people in the appropriate spots where they can do the most good. So this whole notion that you can only have A players is just a bunch of shit. And he would fire people. This is where the other place he was really great. He would pay almost any price for someone that he truly judged to be an A player, because he recognized talent is that important. The other thing was, he was not afraid in our current world where everyone's afraid to fire or say the wrong thing or whatever. He would fire people like, motherfucker, get the fuck out. You suck dick on this. You're out. You're fucking out.
But sometimes he would hire them back later.
Maybe. And he didn't care if he got a lawsuit or whatever, because he realized when it's really good, it's worth paying for. And when it's really bad, it's worth paying for now versus, much worse later. So he was smart in that. And if you listen to his deeds and not his words, you see that. But this gets back to my structure. You know what it actually recreates? It recreates Steve Jobs. Because Steve Jobs was the one man that always had the juice to go into any part of Apple and do whatever the fuck he wanted, right? He developed the infrastructure where he was the word of God when he came in, and nobody was going to say, what do you fucking mean we got to change FileMaker this way? I've been working on this and not. No, they knew. Shut the fuck up. Whatever God says, just say yes and make it happen, right? Or you will be fucking fired before you can finish the statement, unless it's a really bright statement. So if this startup group becomes the equivalent of Steve Jobs, meaning when they decide to pay attention to something, everyone in the subsidiary knows this is the word of God. We are going to make it so, right? You've in some sense recreated the flexibility of what Steve Jobs was. Steve Jobs was able to have the Apple II group just do whatever the fuck it wants because he didn't give a fuck anymore, and pay laser focus to what was the next thing.
All right. It could work. And we're 2 topics into 4 topics, and we've been going for an hour.
Okay. So the next 2 topics will have to be very quick.
Let's move along.
This new topic I think will be pretty quick, but I predict, I suspect, I hope, I pray that 2018 will be Macpalooza upgrade year. And the reason is, if for those, this isn't new news, but in the sense of what the new roadmap for Intel processors. And let me just make sure I don't have your personal information.
Thank you.
I'm going to flip to this my desktop and show a little bit of the articles here. So let's do that.
I can't believe you just said that this topic would be fast. How is this? Okay, anyway, please go ahead.
Everyone's a fucking critic. All right. So this, let me blow this up so you guys can actually read it. These are the new Coffee Lake CPUs that are going to be coming out. And if you notice, they are, here's the 65 watt, which is the wattage that's appropriate for a MacBook Pro.
So hold on. These are Coffee Lake processors. This is the next generation of Intel processors that is expected in 2018.
Correct.
Okay.
So a little frequency boost, not much, but the big boost is we're going to move from 4 to 6 cores. And I believe that MacBook Pros have been limited to 4 cores since 2010.
Yeah.
So this is the biggest upgrade to them. We will be the biggest upgrade to the MacBook Pro in like forever, in my opinion. And I believe that 6 cores is kind of the new minimum number of cores you can have, because I have this this is my 2016 MacBook Pro. It only has 4 cores. For fuck's sake, my iPhone has 6 cores. Yes, they're not the same cores, but it's still 6 goddamn cores. So that you know, MacBook Pro is limited to 4 cores.
95 watts is probably too much for.
No, 95 watts will not. That's too much. So this is it. This is the 65 watt one, is the one that's probably the part that Apple will use for the S7. And they also have a 6-core i5, which is interesting. I don't know if they'll use it, right? But I guess they will. So actually, it's significant in that looks like 2/3 of the MacBook Pro line could be 6-core, and even the low end is going to be 4-core, which is huge.
You mean the MacBook Pro?
The MacBook Pros, correct. So, and the other update is to, so that's the Coffee Lake update, which will be for the MacBook Pros. And then there's also a Kaby Lake R update, which is the CPUs that are they're only 15 watts. So this is the kind of thing you would put in like the 12-inch MacBook, right?
Okay.
And these are all 4 cores. So we could see the 12-inch MacBook with a 4-core, which finally would make it.
Yeah, that would be sexy.
It would be very, very sexy. It would be a hard thing for me to decide whether I want the 6-core or a 4-core that's so tiny, super small that it would finally be a useful machine at 4-core.
Mm-hmm.
So it could be one of the greatest update years, assuming they continue with their updates. You know, we had 2 updates in a row, pretty quick, back to back. So I'm praying that's the case here. This could be the biggest long time for an upgrade for CPUs. And I remember Jeff in one of his podcasts saying he hopes that the update is so bad that it makes him, you know, feel horrible about getting his 2016 MacBook. I think he may be right.
Yeah,
that may actually happen, because again, 6-core to me is the new minimum. 4-core, I regularly pin my processors at 4-core. I think you say during your not so unaverage uses, you regularly have 4 cores at around 40%.
40% if I'm doing something like a Hangout. 25 to 40% is probably my normal usage, with the 40 being like on high. I don't peg my processors unless I have some website or, you know, some flash-based or wannabe flash-based thing that's out of control.
Right. I regularly peg my processors because of use, maybe 2 or 3 times a week to 100% on a 4-core machine.
Really?
Yeah, because I have this. This is a Synology Cloud Station, which gives you a private cloud, kind of like Dropbox.
Yep.
Things files. It destroys a core just kind of regularly.
Huh.
So that's why. Why is Safari such a pig that could easily kill a core to a core and a half? When
you know, I'm running like 18. Well, actually, I quit Chrome. So right now I've got 17 apps open, including 3 crypto wallets. Safari with honestly 60 tabs in Windows. Mail, I've got Photoshop open, although it's not doing anything, and Dreamweaver open. And those both use Java. The versions that I've got both use Java. And I'm at, even with our Hangout going, I'm at 24%.
Right. Well, but you're not actually engaging with the web browser. If you actually start clicking and, you know, surfing and whatever, you'll see the usage go up significantly. Which is, so maybe you don't need an update. I could use an update. And then, of course, if I'm like rastering video or something, it takes forever, even on my 12-core. So more cores are just better. My feeling is that you could easily kill 2 cores web surfing. Microsoft Word can easily kill a core. my.
Well, to be fair, man, I would love to have 6 cores on my iMac as a minimum.
I'm not saying this is for the average user. I'm saying this is for the average kind of power user.
Hey, Rick is saying that we've got the wrong
Coffee Lake
chipset.
Oh, for the KB Lake R.
Yeah, I think that's what he was talking about.
Well, my point is that a KB Lake R processor is now low enough watt that it could be. You're right. They use the M dot cores for the whatchamacallit. But I believe 15 watt is low enough wattage to be used for the MacBook. Whether or not they'll use it is a good question, right? What do the M cores use? Let's see. Let me flip this while I do that research. But the point being is that you could potentially have a doubling of cores on the regular MacBook and a significant boost by 2 cores on all the MacBook Pros, which would be a great.
Yeah, that would make them much more pro-like. Just listen, just as long as we don't have to be able to upgrade our RAM on these Pro machines or the hard drives, just as long as those things are soldered in, that's good.
Yeah, I really wish they would get off. All they have to do is make a slotted architecture for the SSD and the RAM, and everyone's going to be so down on the MacBook Pros. On other MacBooks, I think it's totally cool to make it once and be done with it. But
yeah, let's not get off on that again.
Yeah. The funny thing is I might actually be okay with soldered RAM, because to go to the max soldered RAM on a MacBook is not that expensive. To go from 16 to 32 is probably $200-$300. But to go to max RAM on an iMac Pro is $2,500.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, let's kill that topic and go.
Why do some things feel so good, John? So
you've got the feels. Why don't you show a little bit of what you got that feels real good?
Well, despite how we've made it sound, what sparked this was me showing John this 10-ounce bar of silver I got from a company called Geiger. Edelmetal. It's a German company, and it's just a really, really lovely, and it's in a plastic wrapper that I haven't taken out of. It's a really lovely silver bar. It's got a nice frosted finish with proof mirror insets, and it's got reeded edges, and on the back you can't see, but the back is actually painted with an infrared paint of some sort for identifying, and then it comes numbered. It's like a numbered bar. And this is a 10-ounce bar. It just feels really good in your hand. And the funny thing is that John was talking about, he's asking me, why do some things feel so good? And when my sister had a hold of this, she's not into coin collecting. She's not into, stacking silver or anything like that. And she made the comment to me that oh my God, it just feels so good to hold. I want some.
And there are materials like that for some reason. So I got, I'm not going to give a review of this yet, but if you've ever held an actual DSLR camera in it, there's such a heft to it, right? And it's almost like by holding it, you can feel the weird, careful, high-crafted mechanics somehow just oozing through the housing. It feels good. I got this light camera, and again, I'm not going to review it, but there's this heft brick size to it, and it feels good. And when you hold a bar of silver or gold, your fingers, or at least my fingers, naturally like touching it, and the weight of it and the smoothness of it. And there are some materials like that. I'm like, why would it doesn't seem to be a cultural thing necessarily that people just touch like a smooth, shiny stone and it feels good, especially one.
Yeah, there's some things that have a very tactile, some papers just feel amazing.
Yeah, and
some papers feel amazing. I have a love of silver. This is not silver. This is stainless steel.
You can, even though they're maybe weight-wise, I don't know, they're probably weight-wise, I like the feel of a solid ingot of solid steel if you've ever had a chance to feel it, but you can instantly feel something different when you're holding a bar of silver.
Yes, you really can. You really can. So this is a card protector for, like, poker players to place over the cards on the table to protect them. Mm-hmm. And you don't need anything like this. Most people that when they protect the cards, they just put a poker chip on their cards. But I saw these. I have a nephew that's playing poker, and so I picked him one up, and I picked up a poker playing buddy one, and I got one for myself. But it has this thing. It's that brushed metal, that brushed aluminum. Actually, it's steel. This is a solid steel ingot, but a billet, I think, is what that's actually called. But it looks lovely, and you just kind of want to feel it and touch it.
So, and Rick is making a point that high quality things seem to feel good, and you appreciate that. But I would argue, like, there's not a lot of high quality to just an ingot of gold. It's kind of, you poured it, and it almost wouldn't. I guess if it was craggly and cut your hands, you wouldn't like touching it. But the material. So I agree with what Rick says, is that sometimes you can just feel quality. Like, there is something about,
hold an iPad or an iPhone in your hand in particular.
iPhone 10
feels glorious, doesn't it?
It is the single most nicest phone I've ever felt. It's still not my favorite design, which is the iPhone 4 and 4S, but it feels like a freaking Fabergé egg in my hand. There's something to the mass and the glass and the smoothness and the contours that just make it feel good. It is a motherfucking air hockey puck, though. If you put even there's a 0.1 millimeter grade scale, the thing just slides slowly. Fucking incredible. It's
a cushion of air.
Yeah, it just manages. It's the most slick. I'm destined to fall and crack phone ever, but there is something to its feel as well. So, and I think that relates to what Rick was saying, that you could kind of feel the quality to it. But I'd go further and say there are just some materials that just the touch of them is pleasing, and I can't understand why, because I feel like it's almost like, is that innate? Like, were we born somehow with innate senses of liking certain contours and
I don't know. This is a spinner that I picked up that's carved the CNC or whatever the correct machinery terminology is, out of a solid piece of steel, and it invokes the same kind of thing in me. First of all, it feels incredibly lovely to spin, but it looks great. I like looking at the lines from it's this piece of machinery, and I get some of the same aesthetic goodness that I from holding it and playing with it that I do from touching a great book made with great paper, or looking like holding like a piece of paper for writing, or holding up this silver bar, or this I don't know. I can't put my finger on what you're talking about, but I agree with you that it exists.
So, and my question is, do you think that is something innate to a human being, or is it learned to appreciate over time, and it's learned somehow environmentally?
I would imagine that there is some sort of, this stuff is baked into us, that there's a reason why we like gold so much, and it's not just because of its incredible utility. There's a reason why silver is pleasing. There's a reason why brushed metal is pleasing. I don't think that's cultural. I think that is baked into us.
I'm going to go Ancient Aliens with you on this, and I think you're right. It's somehow baked into us, and here's the reason why. We have an aesthetic that's baked into us. I think there's been studies on this that somewhat support what I'm about to say, which is cuteness of young creatures.
Yeah.
Seems to be universal innate, meaning I've seen toddlers that when they see a baby puppy, right, they're drawn to this first. They still like dogs of all kind, but particularly puppies, even like the kid's like 1.5 years old and doesn't fully understand this. And cross culture
theory to this,
like monkeys will adopt a young puppy, right, because there's something about youth that despite it being completely different species, one species can appreciate in another.
Hamilton has a theory that speaks specifically to this. Dave Hamilton.
Okay, what is it?
That we find babies cute, and it ends up extending to other species for us, but it's so that we don't kill them.
That's a good thing.
Right? I mean, like, squalling children, stinky butt infants, it became a survival trait to want to protect that instead of wanting to get rid of it.
I don't see why. I agree. I don't see why that goes cross species, because many species prey on the young of other species, right? Like baby chicks and stuff in the small, because they're easy prey. But yet still, even other species will.
No, it's cross species. Yeah, but okay, fair enough. I understand what you're saying.
But yet some species will still have sympathy for other cross species thing anyway. And so I heard theories that it has to do with the proportion of head size to eyes, right? Like baby eyes are giant versus their heads, and their heads are giant versus their bodies. And it's similar for puppies and other species as well. So there's the ability to I guess extrapolate. I don't know if that's the right word for this, but to have that cross species sympathy. But that seems to be somewhat innate, and it's a great reason that Dave mentioned, which is we don't want to kill our own, right? Because something that poops and yells at you all day is not inherent. So you have to have something about it inherently that you like.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, but similarly, I suspect, even though Rick thinks it's learned, I suspect there's certain material textile things that we're just similarly, like it's for survival reasons that probably we developed, like Dave said. Like if it's got a big freaking head and big eyes relative to its body size, probably don't want to kill it, right? Because the ones that didn't clearly their genetics didn't pass on. And maybe similarly for parts of the species that inherently found to like gold and silver, just the touch of it, maybe there was increased survival because they use that to some benefit. I don't know. I'm pulling shit out of my ass, but for some reason I have a suspicion that some materials are pleasant more inherently than not, but I don't have any proof. But all right, so we clearly didn't answer that question.
Yeah, we didn't answer. It is also clear that you in particular have something to say about this and don't quite know what it is. So there's something that's kicking around in our minds on this particular issue.
Well, it's just that when you showed the silver bar and you were touching, I'm like, I want to touch that too.
Yeah, and what?
And it wasn't because it was freaking silver either. It was just like, it looks like really nice to touch.
Yeah, that is interesting, man.
Do you ever have that? Like you just see someone?
Yeah, absolutely.
Want to touch that? It looks good.
Yeah,
yeah,
for sure. And it's usually some sort of machined metal. Like, I mean, like, so for instance,
sometimes you just tell the quality of something in it.
These are 2-ounce little ingots, and they're hand poured. They're deliberately rough looking. And yeah, I like these. I think they're really cool, but I don't want to touch them in the same way that I want to touch that 10-ounce bar I showed you.
So maybe it's what Rick said. Maybe that's the answer. It's just like there's some inherent good quality, and we're picking up on it.
Yeah, it could be.
All right, dude. We're probably decently over the hour, but I think that was a fun episode. I enjoyed talking to you on.
Yeah, likewise.
Okay, and goodbye to you, and thank you, and goodbye to our audience.
Yep. Thanks for everybody who joined in for the chat. Thanks for Rick to keeping us honest.
Yes, thank you, Rick.
We need that.
And on that popular topic, we'll talk to you next week.